right, guys, I hate to tell you this. Well, not just for the guys, but for everybody. The clock is ticking. You hear it? You hear it ticking? Yeah. You know what's here a week from tomorrow?
You're gonna win.
What? No, not Super Bowl.
Valentine's Day.
Thank you. Who said that?
Me.
I can't ever tell if people got
With the
masks
mask
on. Valentine's Day. Guys, how many of you still pamper your sweetie on Valentine's Day? I won't ask for a show of hands. Or vice versa. I mean, come on, the ladies can pamper us guys too on Valentine's Day, right? Absolutely. Even after 43 years of wedded bliss, Janine and I, 43, be 44 this year, she's still my beautiful Valentine.
Aww.
She's not even in here. What's up with that? Come on. You guys tell her. Please tell her I said that. Well, the video also. Remember last week when we talked about love, we talked about those 7, and there's probably more Greek words for love, but the one everybody likes the most, which is what? Agape. Okay, you guys agape, me eros. Anyway, no, agape but eros is what I was going to say, which is romantic or passionate love. We've all heard of have you guys heard of Mae West, right? Everybody knows Mae West. The first naughty big screen siren, right, was Mae West. One of her, probably not her most famous line, but one of her famous lines that she had in her long-lived on-screen observances was this. She said, too much of a good thing is what? Does anybody know? Too much of a good thing is, you might say not good for you, right? Not Mae West. Mae West says too much of a good thing is wonderful. Oh. Too much of a good thing is wonderful. Oh. And I think she had it right. Too much, though, sometimes like in a gift, it leaves us unsettled. Somebody gives us a gift, we said, oh no, that's too much. You shouldn't have. Too much of a great blessing leaves us disturbed sometimes as to perhaps, not from blessings from God, but blessings from other people might lead us to think, okay, what's the backstory? What's the motive? Too much in over-the-top giving often causes an unexpected reaction, and it's not wonderful. After all, people say if it's too good to be true, it probably is, right? We tend to kind of dodge invitations to risk greatness, preferring to stay in our little small, our paradigm, our world, our circle, our comfortable existence that's familiar and friendly. Would you agree with me that we sometimes put God in a box? I think we do. I think sometimes we try to put our emotions and our limited knowledge on God. It's like, wait a minute, no, that's not right. We put him in a box. This week's gospel that we just heard, and we also did in the children's sermon, in Luke, Jesus' calling of his first disciples is a classic example of God's too muchness, God's goodness, God's greatness, God's inexhaustible grace. And in the text, Jesus is continuing his walking and preaching tour in the region of Galilee. And he's kind of pressed in by the crowd. I mean, don't you ever feel like pressed in by the crowd where you're just like uncomfortable? I think the most common place for that to happen is probably Costco or Sam's Club. You just feel like, oh man, I gotta get out of here, right? He was being pressed in, so he decided, good idea because it works, to preach from a nautical pulpit. So he pushed a boat out because the water amplified his voice, right? He helped himself to one of the smaller boats that were moored on the shore, a boat that belonged to Simon Peter. So preaching from this boat not only gave him some elbow room, but it also amplified his voice. And afterwards, Jesus ordered Simon to take his boat out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch. Like, if you let them down, you're going to get something, right? Automatic. You that fish know that's not always true. A long, dismal, I'm sure, night of fishing with getting no results. And Peter's going, wait a minute, man, there's nothing out there. But he thinks twice, and he obeys Jesus, and he says this, "But if you say so, Lord, if you say so, I will let down the nets." But I get the feeling he doesn't really believe. Yet he trusts Jesus enough to take some risks to see if Jesus is true to his word. The lowered nets, what happened? They're swiftly filled to overflowing and breaking, and suddenly Simon Peter changes his tone. No longer is he a kind of a go along, get along, hanger-oner of Jesus. Now he suddenly realizes that Jesus is the real deal, man. This guy, a true prophet, perhaps even the long-awaited Messiah, stands aboard his small ship, his little boat. And he's scared, is what it boils down to. You see, Simon is discombobulated. I love that word, discombobulated, by the overwhelming presence of the divine in this humble environment, which is a fishing boat. A fishing boat. And these boats don't look like the yachts of today. They were pretty crude. When both Simon Peter's boat and then the boat of James and John are filled to the point of overflow and the net's breaking, Simon falls before Jesus and begs him. He says, "Go away from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man." What he's saying in reality is this. In other words, Jesus, you're too much for me, man. You're too much. My little boat is too small. Your presence, your glory cannot be contained in this boat. My cup is too small. You see, the great blessing of God's unbelievable favor, the sheer abundance of the gift that Jesus offered to Simon and his fishing partners were just kind of too much for them to handle. Too much to handle physically, too much to handle spiritually. They recognized that they were truly in the presence of the divine. But what did they want to do? Not embrace it. They wanted to run, like run from it. Run from it. It was too much greatness for them to carry. It was too much greatness for them to bear. Remember, Simon Peter and James and John, they had a problem. They caught no fish the night before, and they were looking at zero income for the next couple days. Because they existed basically day to day. But see, what Jesus did was, in that one simple thing, he changed that day-to-day attitude. He changed that paycheck to paycheck attitude in one dramatic act. Jesus showed these fishermen that life was not about just getting by. Life is not about subsistence, barely eking out a living. But he basically gave them a divine invitation to the abundance of God, of life. Jesus offered these humble fishermen more than they could ever have dreamed of. He offered them a brand new outlook on life. Working harder is not always the answer. Working smarter is the key. And Jesus offered these very first disciples, and every disciple since, up until now, a new outlook for their problems. You see, our greatest problems are not trying to overcome shortcomings and shortfalls and overdrafts and late fees. Those aren't our biggest problems. Our problem is that we cannot embrace God's riotous, I love that word too, riotous, ridiculous abundance and grace. I've said it a million times and I'll say it a million again. Grace is unfathomable. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense because that's not how the world works. The world works on a tit for tat. You do this to me, I'll do that to you. You don't do this to me, I won't do that for you. You do this to me, not only am I not going to forgive you, I may not even talk to you for a while. No, man, that's not what grace is. You see, we can't embrace that riotous, ridiculous grace that never runs out. The main problem that Christians have to deal with is the same problem that Simon Peter and James and John had to deal with. And it's the problem of not enough, but too much. Too much love. Too much forgiveness. too much mercy, too much compassion, too much abundance of grace and goodness. Our problem is actually being afraid to embrace the abundant life and the abundance of love that God offers us. Sometimes our lives impress on us we get a false impression from our lives, and it is that we suffer from lacks, that we have deficiencies, that we're missing something. Nobody in the first service knew what this word was, but I guarantee somebody is going to know what this acronym means in here. Does anybody know what FOMO is?
Yes.
What is it, Tracy?
Fear of missing out.
Okay, fear of missing out, right? It's fear of FOMO. I love that word, FOMO. Something comes out. It's like all of a sudden, oh no, I missed that. Oh no, my life's going to be over. I have to get that. That's what drives the secondary market a lot. I've got to have that bobblehead that they only gave out at this game. Now I've got to go find one, right? Fear of missing out. Our daily lives impress upon us that we suffer from lacks, that we're somehow one big gigantic FOMO, that we're missing out. But the real problems in life stem not from too little, but from too much. We think too much. I'm not even going to ask for a show of hands on this, but we think too much. We overthink. We feel too much. We overfeel. But guess what? We love too little. Not too much. We underlove. Overthinking, overfeeling, but underloving. The one thing we should always be over the moon, over the top in, is loving. And it's the one thing we seem to be the most under in. And why do we squirm and get all itchy under the weight of God's great abundance? Why are we so afraid of receiving God's overflowing grace, His overflowing love, and then when it overflows out of us, to give to other people? What do though? Instead, we try to channel that divine abundance into something we can kind of wrap our heads around, more humanly manageable, right? I'm going to make God's abundance easy to swallow and easy to control. I'm going to put it in a little box and I'm going to pull it out when I need it, but I'm not going to live like it's part of my being. You see, we don't want to acknowledge sometimes the power of God's loving hand because sometimes it just threatens our sense of self. Yet the most abundant miracle of all is that it is our very self, hear me, in our weak, injured, cracked, flawed, insufficient selves and needy selves that it's exactly what God's hand reaches out, what God's love reaches out to. He longs to be with the broken. How many of you remember the movie Overboard? Not the remake, the original. Goldie Hawn and who? Kurt Russell, right? What happened? Goldie Hawn, yeah. Goldie Hawn fell overboard. What happened when she fell overboard? She basically lost her identity, right? And so she was with, she falls for this unlikely guy. And for both of them, because of that event of her falling overboard, their lives are changed forever. And that overboard life is the fear that Simon Peter faced as his ship basically floundered and tilted and threatened to sink under this catch of fish. He saw his whole life as a fisherman, his life as a solid member of the community, the village of Capernaum. He was on the council probably. His existence in his family lineage suddenly placed into jeopardy. Why? Because he had now seen a new path for his life, and it was not to be one of day to day. It was to be one of abundance. He had experienced the gift of God's abundant, unstoppable love. God was no longer an ideal or a distant theology or a subject of weekly prayer. God was way beyond that now. Guess what? God was before him, beyond him, behind him, above him, requesting him to put away those nets of safety and security in exchange for nets of love that would gather people, gather men and women that would catch troubled people. You can't go overboard until you go deep, right? You can't go overboard in a kiddie pool, can you? But I am going to ask this, because I asked it at first service. How many of you have ever lounged in one of those little kiddie pools in your bathing suit with like sipping a drink and you just dug it? I want to see. Yeah, me too. Because it's amazing. I love just laying in those little kiddie pools. But can you swim in them? No. Can you go overboard in them? Not really. You can't go overboard until you go deep. To go overboard in love, to go overboard in trust. Let's go overboard in compassion. Let's go overboard in mercy and grace and neighborliness. I'm going to challenge us to all go overboard this week. Will you choose one thing or more to go overboard in? Go overboard in tipping someone. Maybe tip somebody at Lazy Dog 30% or something. I don't know. Go overboard this week in complimenting somebody. Maybe somebody you don't even know in line at Starbucks. I know you don't know me, but that dress is incredible. I don't know. You might get punched anymore. I don't know. Go overboard in telling those close to you how much you appreciate and respect them. You see, Jesus calls us to lead an overboard life. Let's go overboard this week. Amen?
Amen.
Amen.